Let's kick this thing off. So Evan Johnson is joining us. Evan has a really cool background. He was working in some cool security stuff over at Cloudflare previously, and now he is one of the founders of a company called RunReveal, which if you've not heard of, you absolutely should check out some of the stuff they're doing. Some really interesting takes on sort of the modernization of the SIEM, and I'm a really big fan of what those guys are up to. And Evan's just an all around awesome guy. We got to hang out with him a little bit here recently and have some cool chats about some of the stuff that they're working on. But Evan, I know you've got really deep background in security concepts and as a practitioner, and that's generally what the aim of Defender Fridays is just bringing on folks that that have been in the trenches, got some cool stories to tell, and really just kind of have an informal fireside chat with the folks that tend to join us here each Friday. So love to kind of just keep it open-ended, encourage folks to participate. So folks, this is your reminder too, by the way. We really love when you either come off mute and have the conversation with us, ask the question, or by all means use the chat. We try to keep an eye on the chat. And I just want to remind and encourage everyone to keep this format sort of open and bi-directional. It's not meant to be a unicast webinar, right? So please feel free to participate, chip in at any point in time. But without further ado, Evan, take it away, sir. Let us know what you're working on and what's on your mind today.
Oh, yeah. I can just do a quick intro about myself. I ran product security at Cloudflare for like quite a while. I was the first security engineer at that company and was with it for years, leading product security, enterprise security, AppSec. So all things that were bad that happened somehow ended up on my plate at one point or another. And recently, last year, started a company called RunReveal. Tall order, but we're just trying to make a SIM that really doesn't suck, that people really like. And it's going really well so far, but it takes a lot of work, as I've learned. I was kind of with an AppSec and product security background, kind of dumb enough to start this company because it's such a hard problem. But so far, so good. I'm really enjoying it. And thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, I was peeping your LinkedIn a little bit earlier, and I saw a video you posted recently about like where's the best place to send my logs, and without spoiling it, because it's funny. Anybody that sees the link in chat there to his GitHub, you should go check, or his LinkedIn. I'm sorry, you should go check it out. It's kind of funny, but it really kind of highlights like some of the frustrations in the industry, right? Like there's all these products and all these platforms. It's like if I wanted to go and just like try something out just to see like how does it work for my use case, like there might be a demo button and turns out it's actually just a form to contact a sales team. Maybe it's like, great. So how do I exercise the different options that are available to me? And that's frustrating. But so Evan, so give us a little bit of background on sort of some of the problems that you guys are trying to solve with RunReveal. And by all means, folks, know that you know that Defender Fridays is a very vendor agnostic thing. We're never here to pitch products or services, but where I like to hear the overlap, Evan, is that if there's specific problems that you guys have observed at InfoSec, which we know there's plenty of, I'd love to hear just kind of your thought process on the approach to that problem, right? Because whether or not that means that RunReveal is the answer for anyone here, I'm sure that there's insight in sort of your approach to solving a problem that might be useful to anyone.
Yeah. Also, like Lima Charlie, also really innovative in this space as well, and so we're both kind of keyed in on a similar problem here. And like a lot of the problems that we're dealing with are one, like people have too many logs today, and they feel like they're not getting any answers out of them. So I'll sometimes talk to CISOs or security teams, and they're like, we spend blank many millions of dollars on Splunk or some kind of product, whatever the product is, picking on Splunk because it's easy to. And we feel like we're getting blank value out of it. And that's like less than 10% or really, really low kind of signal from those huge sum of money that they're spending. And so like too many logs, not enough signal, too high of a price. And there's all of these architectures that to the system design to support detection at that kind of level of data that you have to get right. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last year is just playing with what that architecture is. What parts do you stream? What parts do you store in a log, in a database? How do you search effectively and cheaply? And so there's no one thing. People sometimes ask us like, oh, we just sponsored B-Sides SF, and we had tons of people walking up to our booth. And some people walked up and they were like, I demand to know how you're different than Splunk. What have you done differently? And it's like kind of no one thing. There's like probably 50 different things that we've done differently. And Lima Charlie as well. There's what a lot of you all have been doing is different too. And so but the key thing is like playing with the system architectures that can support solving the problems that people have, which is interesting.
Some of the things you're saying here really ring, true for me. And it's that I think one of the worst habits that I think we've accumulated as a whole in InfoSec is this hoarding mentality, right? Because the especially years ago when the telemetry wasn't as strong as it is today, you kind of had to, or at least you felt like you had to collect everything. And there was no way to differentiate or granularize that collection. It was just like everything into Splunk. Why? Well, because we don't know what we might need 6 months from now, right? Like we don't, and no CISO, and therefore no team below a CISO wants to be the one to say, oh, we weren't collecting that log, and therefore we can't answer the questions right now in this investigation. So we became hoarders. It was like FOMO of I don't want to miss anything, so I guess collect everything. And to Jeff McJunkin's point, 90%, if not more, of the telemetry getting hoarded is not even useful. Will never be recalled. Will never be to really serve an important purpose. But we collect it anyway because of the fear of, well, what if we need it and we don't have it, right? But it would be amazing if either one, we could kind of wean off of this hoarding mentality because telemetry has gotten much better, right? So now there's much higher signal streams of telemetry where we could say, look, hoard that and keep the rest maybe a lot less time, right? For a much shorter retention period. Or a much smarter approach that says, no, go ahead, hoard away because we allow you to do more intelligent things with the data and we're not going to bankrupt you by deciding to keep it, right? Like, because like you said, right, I can do more intelligent things like put this particular data in a database or stick the bulk of my data in super duper cheap and expensive storage, because does it really need to all be sitting in hot searchable clusters? No, it absolutely does not. That 90+% of the data that's probably not going to be necessary in 6 months, but I want to keep it just because, fine, but let me keep it somewhere dirt cheap, right? Because the idea, I think, of hoarding data in very expensive, hot searchable clusters is like buying a Ferrari to park in the driveway to go to get groceries once a week, right? It just doesn't.
Sales has entered the chat.
Oh man, I'm about to get a target on my back here, but yeah. So I love that, Evan. That's really really insightful, and I love that there's more folks in this space looking to solve that problem, because InfoSec as an industry, I think, needs a little help seeing that there's a better way, because it's still like to your point, the conversation you're having over and over and over again is, well, how are you different than Splunk? But that's because that's all the industry knows right now, right? And I'm excited because it's kind of like, when Uber came around, I probably shouldn't use Uber. They're not the best example of a good company. But when Uber comes around, it'd be like if we all sat there and said, well, how are you different than a taxi? Well, clearly there are some differences, right? And there are some advantages, but there's always going to be some friction in getting the masses to kind of adopt a new way of thinking.
Yes, absolutely. Also, one interesting insight that I'll just add is whenever I talk to CISOs, or like security teams, it's very rare I talk to two that are doing the exact same thing. So everybody has a different, based on where they're at in their security program lifecycle and their maturity level, and like based on where they are, everybody has only so much appetite to try new things within the realm that they're comfortable based on what they have today. And so you really need a flexible architecture to be able to like service those people. Basically, go into the call, say, "What's your problem?" and then try to say, "Okay, how can we make it a little better than it was today?" So people get locked into, like, if they have a big SOC, they're only going to try such and such things within that realm. But if they have nothing, then they might have a bigger area of things, possibility that they might try. But it is kind of a wacky space because nobody's doing the same thing, or they're, if they are, they're just shoveling money into one of the biggest vendors and burning it, lighting on fire.
I want to expand on this concept you just mentioned of flexible architecture and actually put some real world examples to that, because I think that is the next smartest thing that most security teams should be thinking about. And I'll give an analogy that I know will resonate with multiple folks that have been working on networks for a long time. So imagine you have like IDS, IPS devices that you want to deploy throughout your network, right? Think like Palo Alto's, FortiGates, whatever, and it's just going to do inspection inside the network, right? Inside the core, which is obviously a good thing to do. Well, the problem with that is now you're putting these devices in line throughout your network. Well, what happens when you fall out of love with that FortiGate or that Palo Alto or whatever, and you want to rip and replace it? Well, you're going to be apprehensive because pulling that out of the network now breaks connectivity. So you're going to have a network outage, and nobody wants to be in that situation. So you've kind of like you've painted yourself into a corner with that decision. Well, then came along the capability to add what they call like active bypass network taps, which meant it's kind of like a reroute, right? Like it's a tap device that can route through the IPS IDS, but you can also slam it closed where it just routes through, and then I can take the IDS out of the picture if I no longer want to use it. So now I don't have to incur a network outage. Okay, now think about that in SIEM architecture, right? If I have we'll continue picking on Splunk, but this is true for any solution. If I only use Splunk's endpoint, log collector and Splunk's universal forwarder, and everything goes directly into Splunk, it is now a nightmare to ever consider getting off of Splunk, because not only is it replacing a massive back-end solution, but what about all my log forwarding, infrastructure and all that kind of stuff? Like all that's got to get ripped and replaced too. Agents got to get removed and redeployed and all that. And so thinking about a more sort of agnostic approach to, look, let's just use sort of, a lot of folks refer to it as observability platforms, something that just kind of handles like the ingestion and the routing of my data. And that way I can then pick and choose the backend solutions. I can keep using Splunk, but I can use just a sliver of what I used to use. And then maybe I have an OpenSearch instance that's getting the bulk of it because that's much cheaper, right? But now I can kind of pick and intermix and interchange these other solutions without ripping and replacing the core of the deployment. So I'm not sure, Evan, if that resonates with your idea of like a flexible architecture, but I'm a huge fan of that because it unshackles the CISO and the security team to be able to experiment with other solutions and other SIEM platforms and things like that without having to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Totally. And I think actually the stickiest part, I think everything you said is really true, but something that you didn't mention, the stickiest part of it, like buying Splunk, is hiring a team around it and hiring the SOC. And you see a lot of people outsourcing that to MDR, and it's a very complicated industry. But once you have people whose livelihood is like typing into the Splunk console, like you're not ripping it out.
That's exactly right. Oh, that's exactly right.
Flexible, I think flexible, you have to consider that too.
100% valid. Love that. Love that you brought that up, because that's just simply another corner you paint yourself into when you build up expertise only on a particular tool set, because then you're right. Not only are you up against the learning curve of trying to get those folks out of that mindset of I can only use this one tool, but then it's also kind of a morale friction point, right? Of, oh gosh, now I have to kind of know this tool and also learn this other tool. And so keeping a more open-minded team, keeping them kind of cross-trained, making sure they know that nothing is sacred. Hey, look, today you're going to be a Splunk expert, but just know we got to stay proficient at a higher level, right? Be able to translate that query into something else. And that's just important for a practitioner in general, in my opinion, right? Is never just, don't become a tool expert, become a process and approach and methodology expert. That way the tool can change and your expertise does not.
Definitely. And it doesn't matter what part of security you're in, every day is you're basically learning. So it doesn't matter how long you've been in there's always more to learn. And kind of bringing that attitude every day is the best way to be successful in the long term. So I agree.
Jeff, you've been surprisingly quiet, sir.
In my defense, I've been more active on chat. But let's see. I think just to call it out, so in case people weren't looking at chat, I asked about Sigma rules integration, and apparently, hold on to your butts for the next few weeks, I think was the answer Evan gave back. So for me, you get so much out of the box once you have Sigma that like it makes sense to design for integrations with Sigma because you I feel like 0 to effective you get for free if you support Sigma, whereas rebuilding the same idea of Sigma from scratch absolutely does not make sense. So that was a very awesome thing to hear back.
Yeah, I think Sigma has a lot of. I don't think Sigma is perfect by any means. I have been learning a lot about it over the last few months, and it's surprising to me how everything has to be translated to some other target. And because of the way that the different vendors support Sigma and their own kind of rule format. And personally, I wish that Sigma supported something by itself. So like Sigma rules were useful in themselves without needing to be translated. So that's maybe a hint about what's coming.
Ooh, Sigma as a native format.
Yeah.
All right. I dig it. So suddenly no translation needed. I like it.
Because you already have PQL to presumably Postgres. I don't think it's said publicly on the website. So what I'm hearing outlined is, hey, if we're going to support one translation layer, may as well just support Sigma directly and not have to have it translate like essentially twice from Sigma to PQL to native. I like this.
Right. You're very, very close. And we planned all the code's written. We're just writing readmes and whatnot, and planning to open source something in the next few weeks. So you heard it here. Well, also like we definitely want to open source this and give it back to the community since Sigma is an open source project, and I think it does have a lot of potential. But in its current form, I mean, I'm somebody who's learning about it from the outside as a AppSec person getting more into detection. And I read the docs and I was like, oh, it's supposed to be like Yara for files, but for JSON. And then, but it doesn't actually operate on JSON. And so that seems to be an issue. But that's my introduction to Sigma so far.
So I've got a question in chat. So Ryan's asking, he said, I'm not familiar with Sigma. How is it different from Yara? So Ryan, the Sigma project is a collection of sort of seam agnostic sort of threat detection signatures, right? And there's a conversion tool that will allow you to convert that library of detection rules to many, 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 many different backend solutions. So, you know, Splunk or CrowdStrike or Lima Charlie or what have you. And so it's great because it's the first of its kind, sort of open source, very comprehensive collection of threat detection rules. And yeah, so Jeff dropped an example in there of like a particular signature that looks for a particular thing. And one of the things that I love most about Sigma is that it's very, very actively maintained by the community behind it. And some credit to Florian Roth and the Nextron team that are kind of like the shepherds of it. But I'll tell you that when like some new threat hits, you know, Twitter or whatever, within a day, you're going to see Sigma signatures for it. And so very, very fast paced sort of tempo there on that repo. Now, the downside, right? The downside is for the same benefit of so many people contribute to Sigma, therefore there's lots of great signature coverage. Everybody writes signatures a little bit differently, right? And everybody tests them a little bit differently. So the only downside to Sigma is if you were to just like pull in the entire Sigma repository and turn it on, get ready for the floodgates to open of false positives. But at the end of the day, that's a problem I could solve, right? Like I can work through false positives, we can tune signatures and things like that and break that up into phases or something. Still, the ability to bring in a few thousand threat rules on day one is kind of an awesome capability to have. Yeah, and so, you know, by contrast, right, Yara is primarily looking at like, file, process objects, things like that, versus log data. So Sigma is for log data, what Yara is for like files and things like that.
It's supposed to be, but the translation bit is always has rubbed me the wrong way because it translates to proprietary product, and it's only useful in these proprietary products. so many people are writing blogs, building their own sims these days, or cobbling together things on BigQuery, and those people really struggle to make use of this tool.
Well, there's one open source backend that I'm familiar with. If anybody's using Elasticsearch or OpenSearch for like a SIEM, there's an open source correlation engine called ElastAlert, which was originally built by the folks at Yelp. And I know that Sigma can convert into ElastAlert format. So that's a non-proprietary backend. There might be others, but that's one that I've worked with. Whitney and I have worked with it extensively. I see Whitney smiling. And I saw Maxime's reactions when we started talking about translating Sigma rules. He's done quite a bit of that himself.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I think there's sort of like two lenses that you can look at Sigma, right? My background has been endpoint security, so I kind of come from it from the perspective of observables, right? Meaning, look, I know what a new process is. New process, I understand those concepts, and it's easy at first to kind of like confuse Sigma for a standard, right? Hey, I have a Sigma rule. Now I can detect, WannaCry through everything. And it's like, no, that is not it at all, right? It's a common way to describe a search. Where you search, where it gets searched is still completely custom. So when I built like our backend, right, for Sigma, that was like the part where on one hand is super frustrating. I also completely get it, right? The frustrating part is, well, if I'm looking at like this new process through like some event logs, Windows event logs, it's this way. Oh, but these guys that made this signature ingest their Windows event logs and they remap this field to a totally different name. And now all the signatures get broken. And it's like, what the hell, right? The flip side of that is that's not a new problem, right? Like, I think what Sigma did is they looked at like the stack of the problem and they said, well, really, it's like this part's super hard. This part is like, we can generalize. Okay, let's generalize the query part. So at least, we make some progress. And because the other part of it, of saying like a process is a process is a process, well, that's been done by dozens and dozens of people that try to say like, hey, we have the new standard, right? Like OCSF is the thing. This is the way that you name and kind of structure stuff. And I like, part of me kind of wishes that it worked, but it hasn't really, there's dozens of those standards. And then every couple of years, you get another coalition of other vendors that comes out and says, no, this is the new standard. And they just make a new one. So it's bittersweet. Sigma is super bittersweet because you kind of see like the promise behind it. But it turns out that last mile is really freaking hard.
Yeah, in my experience, I think it's a really good starting point, right? To say, okay, I have 0 detections today. Now I have 3,000. But generally what that is okay, I'm going to spend a long time, 6 to 12 months making this repository, this collection my own, and then it's going to be very different from the upstream, right? But it's a great starting point. But yeah, not without its headaches for sure.
I especially like when organizations try to essentially build their custom stuff as a diff from the upstream rule. So yes, process injection is bad, except in the case of our weird internal application that does this. So add a couple exceptions by if it's a file signed by our on-prem ADCS or whatever, PKI, then allow it. But maintain that as a diff, so you still get the upstream. You can still pull it in, as opposed to we literally get cloned one day and started making changes. And hey, look, upstream made changes too. And I'm going to use a phrase like trigger warning, merge conflict. Sorry, Whit.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions for Evan? I mean, this is literally the guy that was running product security for Cloudflare. You said you were one of the first security engineers for Cloudflare. Is that true?
Yeah, I was the first security engineer there.
Wild.
2015. It was a very different company than it was today.
What's one of the most unique challenges you had to solve during your time with Cloudflare? Because I imagine you guys have seen it all.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll give 3 or 2, maybe 2, and then I think of a third One is they run all their own hardware. So they have 200 points of presence or plus around the globe. And so like, there's no identity IAM service to like change a IAM role to like lock things down. You got to build it all yourself. And so service off, like the host's identity that are coming up, the boot chains. There's all of these like very arcane issues that like we have to worry about, or we had to worry. Past life me had to worry about because like the hardware is in some other country. And then from there, we're doing all these weird protocols like the DNS 1.1.1.1, huge DNS provider, huge HTTP reverse proxy. There's not a lot in the RFCs about how to do the things that we're doing and how to break the RFCs. So like a lot of it was like making things up as we went, breaking the standards because we knew the rules. And so sometimes when we broke it in the wrong way, it was tough to clean up. But they have a lot of really smart people there. It was a lot of fun.
Man, that's really cool. That is the bleeding edge when you are sort of going beyond what is defined in the RFC, and you're just like, let's see if this is okay. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, Cloudflare has done quite a bit in the space, and I even momentarily forgot about 1.1.1.1, and that's got to be its own freaking beast. But incredible.
I feel like the moment you turned on 1.1.1 to the outside world, you opened the floodgates of all of that sample traffic. Like nobody but Cloudflare could have done that, because any other smaller organization that doesn't have 200 points of presence to absorb that oncoming traffic will just be overwhelmed by the onslaught.
Yeah, and then there's stuff that's not even super public. Like, I mean, it is public, but it's not as well known that they're a part of Private Relay and a lot of these other, along with some other providers. And so they just got their mitts in all the internet traffic everywhere.
Wild. All right, folks.
I think rephrasing, I'll do this last one and then give it back, Eric. I was the host briefly, so I have the power.
Yes, you were. You do.
I think what you're referring to there is when two private NATed machines need to talk to each other, they have a communication point, and those are always a target. The traffic on those is always a problem, unless you could host it at 200 locations throughout the world, even with any cast. And that makes a cool solution that you don't normally get. Like, people are really, really cagey about revealing those centralization servers, deconfliction servers. I forget what they call them. Anyway, Eric, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, good conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Evan. Folks, I've dropped a couple of his sort of internet presence points on the chat, also in our Slack. Next week, folks, we've got Jamie Williams on, coming to talk about what really is operational CTI. So really looking forward to that conversation. We'll see you all same time, same place next week. Take care, everyone.